Hi everyone, and welcome back to week 7 of our sew along for the Moon Diamond pattern that is in the current issue of Make Modern magazine. So if you haven't joined us yet, it isn't too late. You'll have a bit of work ahead of you, but it's a lovely pattern and it's a fun way to get into doing some foundation paper piecing. So there's links in the caption below about how to get this issue or get a subscription to Make Modern magazine, how to join the Make Modern magazine Facebook group, how to join my little Facebook group for my quilt alongs and sew alongs, all the information that you need. But this week, what we're going to be talking about is, now that we've done all of our blocks, is how to get these papers off and some of the tips and tricks on how to do that. We're also going to talk about how to make your binding, whether you're going to choose the nice, easy, quick way of just doing a single fabric for your binding, or whether you want to do the more complicated. And yes, I am going to say it's a little complicated. It's not actually difficult, but it's fiddly, of doing a binding that follows my gradiated background fabrics all the way around my quilt. So what else are we going to talk about this week? Oh, and sewing it together, of course. So once we've got our papers removed, how we're going to sew it together, and what we should be looking out for and where we should pin and all those sort of things. So get ready and I'll show you all the details of all of those things. So let's talk about how we remove the papers. Now, I keep hearing people that they hate doing this section, this part of it. They hate taking papers out, but I actually really enjoy it. So for the majority of pieces, you can just literally do a bit of an extra fold just to help that perforation. And because we used a shorter stitch length, we did that 1.5 stitch length, the perforations are pretty small. So, as you can see, these are coming off pretty quickly. I do the easy ones first, the bigger outer ones, obviously. And then we pick at the slightly smaller ones, those little border sections. But it's still just folding and pressing, folding and pressing. One last border bit. And because we did do that 1.5 stitch length, our seams are very strong. So, we don't have to stress too much about picking at them and ripping pieces of paper off. Now, it might be a little bit hard to see, but there are a couple of small little pieces of paper that haven't quite come off. They're actually in the threads. And I then pick my tweezers. Now, I've got a very whizzy pair of Chula Pink tweezers, but you could use the tweezers that you use around the house. It would be fine. And I just come back and just grab any of those particular little bits. And then we've got our big main one. And then again, just got a couple of little bits. I could pick these out with my fingernails, I suppose, but I've got the tweezers, so I might as well use them. So this is sort of something you could sit in front of the telly and do. It's pretty mindless, but I think that's it. So there's my block, all with my papers removed. Now, obviously, a lot of paper, bit of mess, needs to go in the bin, but we now have this beautiful block. Now, as I said before, it's quite likely that there'll be bias edges on your triangles. So we don't want to be handling these blocks, a lot. Once you've moved the papers out, pop it aside to get ready to start sewing it together. I'll just show you another way of removing the papers as well that has become a little bit popular recently, and that's by putting water on the seam to help it come apart. Now, you can get these very whizzy little things, which is basically a brush with a little bit of water, and you just press it so that that gets the water down there, and then you just sort of paint along the seam. And this helps to make your ripping much easier and quicker. I'm of two minds of this. I actually prefer the dry paper because I find that this can get quite a lot of little pieces, but I just thought I'd show you how it works with the water as well. Now, obviously, you don't need to purchase a very swishy sort of thing like that. You could literally have a glass of water with a paintbrush and achieve the same result. Not finding much difference between just doing it dry and doing it wet. Maybe the seam does rip a little bit easier when it's wet. There are still some small pieces that have gotten caught in the seams, so I'm still going to have to come back. Actually, that's quite a lot caught in that seam. So, 6 of one, half dozen of the other, I think. It's perhaps what you feel more comfy doing. I think that's got them all. Okay, so here we have our second block all finished. Now, obviously, these two don't go together because we're doing the same ones in a row, but I thought I'd just use these to show you how to sew them together. And we're going to be doing some pinning. So we're going to be sewing them together across the row. So doing a row at a time. So you'd have all of your giraffes or all of your elephants. And we're going to be pinning, gosh, I've still got a piece of paper there. We're going to be pinning that corner of the diamond with this corner of the diamond to make sure it's lining up. And it's really good to line up the diagonal seam of the borders as well, over here, so that we just get them happening in the right spot. Making sure that you're pinning your diagonal seam at 1/4 inch is a little bit fussy and fiddly, but what I do is use this ruler which has a little etched line at the 1/4 inch mark, and I put that on the very side of the raw edge of fabric, so I know exactly where my 1/4 inch is going to be here. Flip it away, and then with my pin in the top point, I just make sure that the pin in the bottom point is in the right spot, and I'll mark that one as well. This means it's just less likely to move when you're starting to sew. And when you do your 1/4 inch down here, you'll be hitting all those 3 spots so that when you open it up, it'll be aligned beautifully. So I'll go and do that on my sewing machine and bring back not this pair because, as I said, I don't want an elephant and a giraffe next to each other, but I've got to go and pull out a few more papers first, and I'll show you what that seam looks like and that connection. Okay, so here's my first two elephants that I have sewn together. As you can see, the borders are matching and my two feature diamonds are pretty close to matching. And pressing, you press open because there is quite a lot of bulk there. So press open, and when we come to putting in the next row, we'll need to pin this intersection as well through the middle of our open seam. And we'll also need to be doing the same pinning here in terms of matching the bottoms of the diamonds and the edges of your borders. So that's the next step. Taking all the papers out and then starting to put your rows together and then multiple rows together to get your quilt top. I've got a bit of work to do, so I will go and do that and come back and we can start talking about making your binding. So when you have got your quilt top all together, you've got your seams pressed open, things are starting to look beautiful and you're so thrilled with it, don't forget to just do, I call it a victory lap, a row of stitching about 1/8 of an inch in from the edge of your quilt top. Not too small a stitch length. I usually do it at about a 2.2 or something like that. And remembering that some of these will be bias edges, so just be sort of gentle as you're putting it through your machine. Don't push or pull, just so that you don't get any buckles and waving. But it just means that when you perhaps pop your quilt top away for a little while until you get a chance to quilt it, that all these seams at the very edge won't pop open. Also, when you put it perhaps on a long arm, if you're going to get it long armed, the tension that happens when you put things on a long arm, those sort of stitching and seams can pop open quite easily. So this victory lap all the way around is sort of the last thing I do before I put aside my quilt top ready for quilting. Now, we're going to talk quickly binding this week as well. For this quilt top, which, goes, it's a bit more strident than the one I've been doing in the sew along. This was sort of the first version I made. So there's purples and bright teals and reds and quite bright corals and all the rest of it. So I was struggling to think about what binding to put with this. A lot of people would do sort of a black and white or something like that. I am going to just do one fabric all the way around, and I'm going to use the Chula Pink stripe from Tabby Road Deja Vu because it has all of the colours in it that this quilt top has. So I'm just going to do that as my quilt binding. I think that's going to look really cool. Yeah, I think that's going to be good. So with a stripe, we will need to sort of match the stripes up, and I'm going to sort of go and cut a few strips so that I can show you how to do that. So I've cut my strips for my binding. Now I personally cut them at 2 1/4 inches wide rather than 2 1/2. That just seems to suit my way of binding and the thickness of my batting and things like that. And I've just noticed that this Chula Pink stripe sort of starts here at the olive and green and brown, goes all the way through, repeating those colours here, gets to the navy, repeats and ends on a navy. Make it a little more complicated. So when I'm going to want my stripes to match, I not only want the stripes to line up, but I want the colours to match. So I'm having to lose, this amount of fabric so that I can get it lining up with the very end of the strip. So that was a bit strange. I didn't think that was how it should be. Now, the quickest way I find, and when I say quickest, it's still a little bit fiddly, is to fold my stripe so we're on the stripes near the end, and I just sort of make sure that it's going to, line up, and this diagonal, which is where we're going to sew in a minute, is going to be still on good fabric. It's not out in the selvage and things like that. And so when I'm happy with where that's going to be, I come and grab some glue, be it a little bit of glue stick. I'm grabbing my EPP glue here. And so I'm just going to put a little bit on this side of the fabric. So this is going to get cut off. So it's not going to stay in my binding and my quilt. And then I just tweak it so that my stripes are all going to match up. Make sure that it sets so that then I can unfold that. I've got that lovely fold line there, and that's what I'm going to sew on. So I'm going to go and do that. Okay, I've just been to the sewing machine and I've sewn my seam line right on that fold, and I've just pressed it back, and I'm pretty happy with it. It's maybe a little bit out just here, but that's going to be in a seam, so that's all right. So once you're happy with that, you can trim it 1/4 inch away. I usually just do this by hand and by eye rather than getting too excited about getting the rotary cutter and stuff like that out. And yes, I have that much extra fabric to do something else with. That'll be fun. So I'll now go and press that open, remembering there was a little bit of glue in that seam allowance. So you can always just dab that with a little bit of water if you weren't going to be washing your quilt anytime soon. So once you've pressed that open, you can press your binding as per normal. And what I like to do is, once I've pressed it, I pop it on one of my little binding buddies or binding babies. That means that I've done my binding at the time I've done my quilt top. I've popped it away aside, ready for when my quilt comes back from the long arm, or I've finished quilting it myself. So once I've finished making all of that binding, she's going to get put on my little cute binding buddy, and I can then wait for that quilt to be finished quilted, and then I won't have used that fabric accidentally for something else. I've already made the binding and it's all raring to go. So now for the quilt that I've been sewing in this sew along that has these lovely pastel background colours to it, I'm going to do a scrappy binding that follows the colours around the quilt. So it's going to be a little bit more fiddly, and I do need to wait until I have quilted my quilt top, because obviously, especially when you do dense quilting, the quilt will shrink a little bit. So if I measured and cut my binding now to follow that gradient, I would be just that little bit off, and it would just look a bit awful. If I'm going to go to the time and effort and fiddliness of doing a graduated binding to match the background colours, I'm going to wait until I've finished quilting it and then cut it specifically and spend the time and effort then. So the other binding is going to wait until next week when I show you the quilting. Here is my quilt top in the progress of being sewn together, and here it is hanging over my ironing station, all completed and put together. I'm so thrilled to get to that point. And then finally got it up onto my long arm with the backing that I have chosen, and it was in my stash and it is just going to look fantastic. So I hope you have fun getting your binding decisions made, whether you're going to go for a single binding all around your quilt or to do the gradated one with me. I look forward to what your thoughts are for your binding, and look forward to seeing some of your completed quilt tops in our Sew Along and Quilting group or over in the Make Modern Facebook group. So have fun, enjoy this step, and I look forward to chatting to you next week and showing you my quilting on both of the quilts.